All right, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to Hashing Over History. I say it every week. I'm going to say it again. This is a partnership. This program is brought to you by the Thousand Islands Museum, the Clayton Historian, Tom Laclair, that's me, the Sesquicentennial Committee, and the Opera House. So we continue that partnership to bring you these wonderful programs. We also got the History at Noon. Now typically what I would do when I come to these programs, I introduce a speaker. And today's speaker is Charlie Stage. Charlie's not with us today. All right, so he was called out of town this week on a family event. So he got with me early enough in the week. Because when you're the historian and you're in charge of a program and the speaker can't make it, what happens? Find another speaker or give the program. And I remember last week I said, who saw the TV interview on the WWNY that I gave on the Frontenac Hotel? And a few people raised their hand. So guess what you're going to learn more about today? All right. Because I gave that interview and I had to do some studying, preparing for that, and now short notice I'm giving the program, I said, well, why don't I share a little bit about what I learned. Now, if everything goes to plan, next week is Carol Williams at 10 o'clock. Charlie still wants to do his program, so he may be on at 11 o'clock or 11:15. So next week may be a double header. And that closes out our Hashing Over History. History at Noon is going to continue through the end of the year, once a month on the second Wednesday at noon. So, all right, so I am going to be talking today, but before I talk, I'm going to give you a thinking quiz. All right? I am going to be asking you 10 questions. Chances are you don't know the answers, but it's going to pique your interest to listen to my lecture. All right. So I did tell you that we're going to learn a little bit about Charles Goodwin Emery. What year was Charles born? All right. I don't think any of you, I didn't know. What year did he die? All right. Just continue thinking, because I'm not telling you the answers yet. How many times was he married? How did he make his wealth? His millions? Oh, I've heard that. All right. What year did he buy that piece of land out that window right there? All right. What was the name of that island right out the window? And it was not called Calumet when he bought it. All right, we are also going to be talking about the Frontenac Hotel. And I know a few of you already looked at the pictures up here. Did he build or have the Frontenac built? Or was it already an existing structure that he bought? All right. What year did the Frontenac Hotel burn to the ground? That's 8 questions. I got 2 more. Did anyone die in the Frontenac Hotel fire? If so, how many? And then I'm going to revert back to the castle. What year did the Calumet Castle burn? So there's 10 questions. And why did I ask you those 10 questions? Like I say, now I'm going to go into my lecture, and I'm hoping you should hear the answers to all 10 of those questions if you pay attention. All right? At the end of the lecture, we're going to come back to these 10 questions and see how many you can get answered. All right. Let me set these aside. And again, Charles Goodwin Emery. Some of you probably already have seen this book. It's called, and I even though I have French heritage, I can't speak French. But toujours jeune, always young, you own it. I borrowed it from the, right here, my mind gets blown, Davis's. Thousand Islands, Emery, and the New Frontenac. This is where nearly 100% of the information I shared today came from this book. All right? Rex Ennis. He's no longer with us. I never met him personally, but I'm very thankful that he put in writing all this great information. Okay. So, Charles Goodwood Emery was born on July 20th, 1836 in Portland, Maine, the son of Hiram and Mary Goodwin Emery. The Emery name is an old and distinguished New England family name. In 1840, when he was 4 years old, Charles had an uncle, Eben Goodwin, who started working in a chewing tobacco company. He actually owned it. It was called Goodwin and Company. All right. So Charles is 4 years old. He's not into the tobacco business yet, but his family, one of his uncles, gets into the tobacco business. All right. For the age 4 to 22 years old, we don't know much about Charles. All right. But he focused on education, no doubt. When he was 22 years old, again, this is in 1858, he started working for the Goodwin and Company tobacco business. He may have been working there a little bit before, but we don't. Rex Ennis knows that when he was 22 years old, he was working in his uncle's tobacco business. In 1870, he's now 34 years old. He's documented as a tobacco dealer, all right? And he's continuing to learn the trade, all right? In 1876, he's now 40 years old, and he outright purchases Goodwin and Company from his uncle for $14,000, all right? That's a lot of money in 1876. Whether it was his personally hard-earned money, or he came from that wealthy, distinguished family, maybe his parents gave him the money to buy the uncle's tobacco factory. All right, so now he is a tobacco company owner at 40 years old. 2 years later, he makes one of his very first patents. All right. Back in the day, 1878, they were rolling tobacco into cigarettes. But a lot of times they would put it up to their mouth and the paper was so fragile that it would disintegrate, right? And the person couldn't smoke it because the wrap would disintegrate and the tobacco would fall. All right. He made a patent for a new type of cigarette paper that allowed it to be more sturdy and more smokable. So basically, we're going from the tobacco chew to an actual cigarette. This is around 1878, and he's helping to make this happen. All right. A few years later, he continues. He's doing all kinds of patents. The guy, very intelligent. All right. So he's learned this tobacco trade, and he's learning how to mass produce, and so he can sell and make more money. But he's doing all kinds of patents when he's in his 40 to 45 years old. All right. In 1882, he purchases that island across the way. He had first visited the Thousand Islands about 1878, a few years earlier. All right. Probably brought into this area because it was right about the time that President Grant had come, and we all want to learn more about this area, all right? But in 1882, he purchases what was called Powderhorn Island. From the widow of Daniel Lawrence, he bought it for $1,000. All right, so he bought the tobacco factory for $14,000. He bought the island for $1,000. Still pricey, but I wish I could buy it for $1,000. All right. And in the book, it says that he changes the name back to Calumet Island. So it had been named Calumet Island previously, several owners previous, because they bought it from someone that called it Powderhorn. But in the book, and they had it kind of underlined that he called it back, or renamed it back to Calumet. And he immediately goes about building his first home on the island. All right? It is not the stone castle. He built a wood frame structure. All right? Did not call the wood frame structure the castle. That was just his house. All right? Again, he bought in 1882 the island. By 1883, the family is moving into this wood structure. When he bought the island, it came with property right here on Riverside Drive. I don't know how many buildings, but a fair amount. Because he had talked about taking some of these buildings where the back end of the buildings are up against the river. He wanted to change the structure, not turn the buildings themselves, but make the back side of the buildings the front, and the ones that are on the street side the back. Because he wanted to see the front side of the buildings. He didn't want to see the back side of the buildings. And there was a lot of people on the boats, expensive boats, yachts of the day, and they said Clayton would do better if the people on the river could see the front of the building and not the back. But it never happened. It was a dream of his, but the town leadership said, no, go back to your island, we'll be okay. Yeah. All right. All right, in 1886, he makes what is probably the most important patent, and it was mentioned earlier. He patents a belt machine that allows the mass production of cigarettes. So he came out with this patent a few years earlier where now we can smoke them, but now we want to make them fast, and we want to make lots of them. And he produces the machine. And I haven't ever seen a picture of his machine, but it would be large. It'd probably fill most of the front of this room right here. I mean, there's lots of different moving parts, right? But the new machine, it transformed a lot of things. First of all, it reduced the number of people needed on the production line almost in half. All right, so where you might have had, 100 people working in a factory rolling tobacco, now there's only 50 needed. All right, so they're saving money because they have less workers. All right, production skyrocketed and prices fell, and smoking became mainstream. Up until this point, it was really something only for the wealthy. They're the ones that could afford tobacco. But when Charles Goodwood Emery, he makes his patent, now cigarettes are being made by the millions, and people like you and me can now smoke. All right? And I wrote on here, and I'm being funny, but I said, I wonder if the Surgeon General made him put a thing on the side of his cigarettes, smoking. But really, again, smoking now becomes mainstream. You're cool if you got a cigarette in your hand. And Charles Goodwin Emery is saying, you're cool because I'm getting wealthier. All right. Now, in fact, not only did they sell cigarettes, in regular packs, he sold baseball cards, or you buy a pack of cigarette, it came with baseball cards. How many people in here used to buy gum, and the baseball cards would be in the gum? Well, back in the late 1880s, you bought your cigarettes and got baseball cards in there. The Goodwin and Company baseball cards. And some of the rare remaining cards sell from anywhere to $10,000 to $20,000. You go on home and you pull up Google and you put in Google or Goodwin baseball cards, and you will see some pictures of some of those. All right. In 1887, he invested in the St. Lawrence River Skiff, Canoe, and Steam Launch Company. I think pretty much most people in here have probably heard about it, that company, but I'm going to read a little bit out of the book. Make sure I get the right page. Yep, 95. All right. Under skiffs in this book, it says the St. Lawrence River Skiff, Canoe, and Steam Launch Company, Clayton, New York, was originally founded by A. Bain and Company. That's Dr. Alexander Bain of Clayton. He was a dentist. And Xavier Colin, all right, in about 1873. They were manufacturers of the skiffs and the canoes. By 1887, though, additional capital was required and the name was changed. And here it says, one of the large and successful corporations is the St. Lawrence River Skiff, Canoe, and Steam Launch Company, founded by Charles G. Emery, John D. Little, John G. Frazier in 1887. So there was already a skiff company here in town, but they got into where they needed a little bit more capital, and Charles Emery essentially, I think, helped them, but he also kind of took over. And there was some bad blood between the previous owners and now Mr. Emery. And the previous owners ended up going to Oswego or Fulton area, and in some of their newspaper ads says, you don't want to buy the fake skiffs from Mr. Emery, you want to buy ours. All right, so back in around 1890, there was the battle of the skiffs. Who had the original? And Emery would say, oh, mine was original, but it wasn't. He bought out a company, essentially. All right. Now, I talked about he had patented this belt machine. He has it, and he's producing a lot of cigarettes. But he's not the only tobacco company around. There's several, some big ones, all right? But they don't have this fancy machine that Mr. Emery does. He does not sell the patent. He holds the patent. But basically what he does is leases his machine to all these large tobacco companies with the promise that I'm going to get royalties from all of you. For every 1,000 cigarettes you make, you're going to give me 25 cents. Doesn't sound like a lot of money, but when there's millions and millions of cigarettes, that quarter adds up. And he made a lot of his wealth off of the royalties of his patents. All right? All right. Now, I talked about all these companies, and you got Mr. Emery, he's got his Goodwin and Company. There's others, and I'll list some of the names. But they form what is called the American Tobacco Company, ATC. All right? It was a merger of the 5 largest companies, tobacco companies of the day. The net worth of 5 companies was $25 million, $1889. All right? Goodwin and Company was only 10% of it. But again, he owned the machine. So even though he only owned 10%, he had a lot of the controlling interest. He was elected treasurer of this new American tobacco company. So he knew where the money was coming and going. Again, he's the treasurer. Now in 1890, 1 year later, the U.S. government establishes what's called the Sherman Anti-Trust Act, because there's monopolies popping up all over the United States, not just tobacco, steel. I'm sure there was other ones. But the Anti-Trust Act says we don't want monopolies. We don't want monopolies today. They did not want monopolies back then. So American Tobacco Company comes together, 1889. 1890, the Antitrust Act is established. But it's going to take many, many, many years for the Antitrust Act to really do anything about this big monopoly. All right. In 1895, while he's making big dollars, he replaces his wooden frame house on Calumet Island with a stone castle. This is when the castle now becomes, because he built it from red sandstone from Potsdam, New York. All right. It's a solid structure. It's special. It's a castle. All right. So back in the day, he probably would have looked down the road and he saw George Bolt's castle. And he said, well, he's got a castle. I got a castle. But anyways, that's when the castle name came into effect. Again, he's in his castle. He's looking this way. He sees Clayton. It's like every day. It's like if you live on the river or on this side, you're looking out, you see the river. He looks in, he sees Clayton every day. Right? At the same time he is built the stone castle, he buys what is called Shot Bag Island. Governor's Island, is that what they're calling it today? All right. Well, he bought that island for $5,000. He bought his island for $1,000. A few years later, he buys a smaller one for $5,000. All right. So prices, they might say, oh, we got some people with wealth in the area. He also owned property on Grindstone, Picton, and many other islands in the area. He was wealthy, and people in the area knew it. All right. This was around 1895. The same year, 1895, Clayton experienced one of the greatest fires, what we call the Great Fires, or I do. It's where we're sitting right now, this block. Everything burned to the ground except for the buildings on the four corners. All right. Mr. Emery knew that we didn't have a good fire department. Actually, it was established in 1887. He came in and he bought some fire equipment and donated it to the fire department because of the Great Fire. And he said, well, nobody wants to have that happen. Obviously he's a Clayton resident, even though he's living on the island, but he donates fire equipment to the village. And he was not only the fire department, but he was very involved in helping a lot of groups in Clayton, from youth to up to senior organizations. So he was well liked by the community. All right. In 1898, he's now 62 years old. I'm 60, so he's older than me. In 62, when he purchases the building that is standing, what's called the old Frontenac Hotel on Round Island. And he goes about renovating it and rebranding it the new Frontenac Hotel. All right. The Frontenac Hotel was built about 20 years earlier. Right about the time that he came here for the very first time, just touring the Thousand Islands. That hotel was being built about that time. All right. So that was one of my test questions. All right. So he takes this hotel that's already standing and he transforms the hotel with glamour, more glamour, expected of the wealthy social age tourist. Fine dining and leisure with all kinds of shopping on site. And most people will remember Charles Ellis, the Ellis store, the Ellis block. Well, Charles Ellis had a store on the Round Island, so when all the wealthy come shopping, they had an Ellis store right there on Round Island. All right. In addition, there was all kinds of sporting events, golf courses, tennis courts, baseball field, archery, bowling, ping pong, concerts, swimming, carnivals, boating, yacht club events, fishing events, on and on. Can I have you come up? I want 3 pictures. These, all with the, not the fireworks, but these 3. You can start passing those around. All right. These are some postcards. The Chamber of Commerce printed them out for me yesterday in large, so you could see them better. All right. All right. I want to read a little bit from page 116 of the book. And this falls under what's called The Guest. It said, Emery wanted a hotel that would cater to the society's emerging titans of industry, a world-class resort hotel. The Thousand Islands was experiencing the golden age. Summer in the cities was hot and polluted, and the people with means found relief at the resort hotels around the country. The automobile was not yet prolific, and the Thousand Islands was just a 6 to 8 hour train ride from New York City. As a result, the Thousand Islands developed into a major summer resort, and Charles Emery capitalized on the people coming from the cities. You know, they wanted to come here. It's beautiful. Sunsets are gorgeous. The temperature's cooler. Get me out of the city. Charles Emery says, please come to my wonderful resort. And it was wonderful. Everyone that came was extremely happy. But they had money. All right? For the people that lived in Clayton, you were lucky if you could work there, let alone stay there. All right? But in 1899, this is just 1 year after he purchases the Frontenac, his first wife, Francina, dies at the age of 55 of breast cancer. Right? The two of them had been married for 36 years, and they had 5 children together. 3 of the children lived to adulthood. 2 of them died young. So his first wife, age 55, died in 1899, 1 year after he bought the Frontenac. All right. But he was not a widower for very long. Okay? In 1901, and I don't even think it was 2 years, it's 1899 to 1901, but I think it's like 18 months, something like that. He marries a divorcee, Mrs. Irene Smith Boynton, and the two marry in London. All right? She had 2 daughters. Irene was first married to George A. Boynton of the Boynton Furnace Company fame. Now, I don't know anything about the Boynton Furnace Company, but say it, she had money. He had money, she had money. All right? But the two married relatively soon after Francina's death, and the rumor mill of the day was alive and active, and some say that she was his mistress before the marriage. So you can imagine everybody walking up and down Clayton was talking, can you believe his wife died and he's already... Yes. All right. And to top it off, she was 15 years younger. How? Yes. All right. But Irene had an incredible effect, not only with Charles, but on the castle and in the area. She transformed the ballroom. She held spectacular events. She added more landscaping. And when I say she did it, she had it done, you know. She had vision. She says, I want this and I want that, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And Charles was happy to do it. All right? Let me read a little bit out of page 51. It said that Emery married Irene in 1901. She would have an immediate effect on the Calumet. She was 15 years his junior and enjoyed an active social life. The next round of construction on the Calumet would begin the same year as their marriage, with addition to a grand ballroom. Emery refers it as the West Wing, reported to be the largest private ballroom in all of New York State. All right. Construction of the 50 by 25 foot ballroom was begun in July and finished before the end of the year. That's moving along real fast. Potsdam sandstone was used in this addition. Right. So I think of Cinderella, I think of the ball, now I think of Calumet Castle. All right. So for about 5 years, there's a lot of good things happening. His second wife, she's again younger, social life, having all kinds of parties. But in 1907, 6 years after the marriage, she dies at age 56 on his 71st birthday. Yeah, all right. She had been ill for 2 years. She literally died within the castle. She had been in New York City at a hospital. They pretty much knew that she was not going to survive. They brought her here, and she was at the castle for about 2 weeks before she passed. All right. But Irene was very popular. She was well loved. Flags were lowered to half-staff all over the Thousand Islands, not just Clayton, but Alex Bay, Cape Vincent, up and down. She was well known. The family was well known. Her funeral was held inside the ballroom, not of the castle, but of George Bolt's Waldorf Astoria Hotel. So obviously the families were connected, and so she died here and then went down to New York City where they held the funeral. Now I thought this was interesting. After she died, Charles no longer lived inside the castle and forbade anyone from living inside the castle. He lived on the island. He took over the caretaker's house. All right. He maintained the castle. He maintained the landscape, kept everything pristine, but he dedicated the castle to Irene, and if she's not going to be in it, nobody else. Now they would go in it. Nobody lived in the castle after she died in 1907. He also had a large collection of boats, and they all remained in dry dock. So it affected his life significantly, and obviously we would expect that it would. All right. In 1911, so we're jumping ahead about 4 years, becomes a tough time for Charles. All right. In 1911, I was talking about the Anti-Trust Act from about 20 years prior, roughly. Well, they're successful now of breaking up the American Tobacco Company. And, it affected his wealth because now he was no longer having such relationships with the other tobacco businesses. But for 20 years, he did extremely well. But what happened also in 1911 was his Hotel Frontenac burned to the ground. All right. So in 1911, he's now about 75 years old. The antitrust has pretty much broken up his tobacco business, making it harder. He's now lost his hotel. He's 75 years old. What do I do? He doesn't have the energy of a young man anymore. So he's pretty much thinking this is retirement. All right. He lived for about 4 more years, but in 1915, at 79, Charles Goodwin Emery dies in New York City, and he is buried at the Greenwood Cemetery, Brooklyn, New York. At his death, for his obituary, his wealth at the time was $4 million. All right? All right, this is 1915. In 1915, there was a few other millionaires that died. All right. In 1915, John Jacob Astor was worth $1 million. J.P. Morgan was worth $3 million. And Alfred Vanderbilt was $10 million. So Alfred Vanderbilt had him beat, but Charles had more wealth than J.P. Morgan and John Jacob Astor. And they all died in the same year. All right? So I guess the descendants did pretty well that year. All right. Charles Emery's estate was divided up equally among his 3 surviving children. It doesn't say anything that his second wife's 2 daughters, I'm sure that they were well off in their own family, but Charles, again, 3 children, split equally 3 ways. A trust of $100,000 was created for the maintenance of Calumet castles in hopes, Charles had hope, that castle would remain for time, forever. It'd be sad for him if he were to come and see that the castle is not there. All right, but he left that trust, and he's got $4 million, and I'm saying to myself, 100,000 really kind of sounds like peanuts. Why didn't he dedicate $1 million to it? And it's probably still there. All right. It's said that Mr. Emery loved boats. When he died, he owned 49. From skiffs to his 135-foot yacht, the Calumet. All right. So that ends a little bit, for Charles Goodwin Emery. I want to now transition for about the next, no more than 10 minutes. I want to talk about the new Frontenac Hotel. As far as Charles, he was once called Lord of the Upper River because he owned so much property. But in Clayton, he was called the Guardian Angel of Clayton. Now, you wouldn't get that name, Guardian Angel of Clayton, unless you were doing some good things. All right, so the people here considered him their guardian angel. He purchased the Frontenac Hotel again in 1898. He was already living on Calumet Island for 16 years. And he was living in the stone Calumet Castle for 3 years. So again, he's living in a beautiful castle. He's looking across. Now the Frontenac, you would have seen it out these windows if it was still there. Right? He's seeing it every day. So in 1898, the people that owned it, their investments, they had some financial problems. He came in and he bought it from them at about 1/3 of its, true value. So he bought it cheap, but then he invested, and I don't know that I have the amount, but hundreds of thousands, bringing it up to the standards for the rich and wealthy. It was a 300-room hotel. All right, it was 6 stories high. And again, I mentioned a little bit, all types of sporting and recreational activities. When the people came up from the city, they could come up here for a week at a time, a month at a time. It was almost endless activities for them to do. All right, and they were pretty much, there was all kinds of workers that were there assigned. If we had a wealthy guest come, this person is assigned to you. Anything you want, you're going to get it. Now, we jump ahead. The fire that took 1911. It started in room 117, not of the hotel, but of the men's dormitory. It started at 9:30 p.m. and the room was a musician, Ivan Konsky. All right. The band was preparing for a 10 o'clock concert, and when they left the room, you can imagine, they're just sitting around talking. Oh, it's almost 10 o'clock. We better get going. There's one of those cigarettes that he made his millions in, and the person must have thought it was extinguished. It was not. They called it an improperly discarded cigarette, considered a cause. All right. Fanned by the wind, the fire spread quickly. Now, the dormitory was 150 feet from the hotel itself. So the dormitory is not inside the hotel. It's off to the side, but there's an extension to the hotel. The efforts to extinguish the fire was hampered by lack of firefighting equipment, lack of hoses, and some of the hose couplings did not fit. It was one style, a different style, so didn't fit each other. Also, when they were trying to call Clayton Fire Department, Alex Bay Fire Department, they realized that nobody was on duty that knew how to operate the switchboard. They had beautiful switchboards, but at the time, 9:30, almost 10 o'clock at night, the switchboard operators were already off for the day. All right, could not get a hold of them. By the time they got a call to the Watertown Fire Department, the fire had been going for 30 minutes. Watertown called Alex Bay and Clayton said, "You got a fire in your backyard, get going." All right, but it had already been burning for 30 minutes. I mentioned that the fire started in the dormitory, and then it moved to the corner of the hotel where the kitchen was. All right. Now all this time, now the alarms are going off in the hotel. You know, the hotel itself is not really ablaze, but hey, we got a fire. We better get prepared. If they don't get it out, we're in trouble. So the guests are running through their rooms. They're pulling their valuables. They're getting them out. The staff is running around the home. They're pulling tapestries, paintings, you know, because this hotel is filled with worldwide riches. You know, the Emerys traveled, other wealthy guests would travel, they would give gifts that were throughout the hotel. So there was millions and millions of dollars of stuff. A lot of it, though, they're getting out at this point. All right. It said that even though they got a lot of it out, there was still a lot that was not. So the fire went from the dormitory to the hotel kitchen before moving to the main portion of the hotel. Inside the hotel, they had wonderful fire equipment, fire hoses, but the wooden structure went up like a matchstick. So try to take a fire hose and battle a blaze that's coming at you with such extreme heat, you just couldn't fight it. You know, once they couldn't get it out in the dormitory and it started blazing, it went. All right, I'm going to read a little bit from page 170, an eyewitness account. All right, this is Thomas R. Vaughn of New York, and he was in Clayton, and he watched the fire from the start. In an interview for the Syracuse Journal the following day, he made the following observations. The only thing left standing is the annex. The main part is totally destroyed. The scene during the burning is one hard to describe. No one was lost, and only one man hurt that I knew of, and he was Charles Martin, who fell from the roof and was taken to the Herald House in Clayton. The fire originated in the servants' quarter, all right? We called the dormitory, but the servants' quarters. And it was fully an hour and a quarter before it communicated to the hotel proper. So depending on whose account, I said it was a half hour. He says that it was, what did I just read? An hour and a quarter. I mean, to me, that sounds like a slow-moving fire. All of the guests had ample time to get out all their possessions, and I understand that they did. Again, this is part of his interview. There was only one man that I learned of who lost everything, and he did not. He was away from the hotel at the time, so he wasn't able to go to his room and get the stuff out. He said, I don't know how many of the guests had retired, but all had ample time to dress, and I did not see any panic or excitement. They just went into the rooms, they were getting dressed, getting the appropriate dress, getting their stuff, but he says there was no panic. All right? The fire departments from Alex Bay and Clayton were called. They responded quickly, and the fire apparatus at the hotel was used. So again, a different account. I believe that all the guests got out all their belongings, but while the hotel proper was burning, The heat was so intense that everyone was driven away from a long distance. They could not stand it. After it had burned down, however, they came back. A great many of the guests went to the Thousand Islands Park and some to Clayton after the fire. And he finishes up his interview and says, every river craft from Alex Bay and Clayton was out, and the scene was just wonderful. It was hard to describe. So it almost looked like a party atmosphere, but it was no party. And I remember, they're talking about the heat and the brightness of the fire. And Marilyn, you talked about, I believe you said it was your great-grandmother.
Right, she wrote in her diary by the light of it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so where are we? I'm losing my place. So he said in his interview that no one had died. All right, that is a error. He did not know that someone had died, but one person, in fact, did lose their life. Fishing guide Joseph Calhoun. He had gone inside to help ensure all the guests were out. He was with a group of other individuals, Joseph Lonsway being one of them, and he told Joseph, go ahead, I'm right behind you. Joseph got out, turned around, and Joseph Calhoun was not there. They found his body about 2 weeks after the fire. It took a long time to go through the remains, but they did find his body. You pass those two pictures around. Thank you. At the hotel, there was a 16 by 24 foot flag that flew up top. The flag was saved at the time, and I understand now it is part of the Thousand Islands Museum archives. I personally have never seen it, but maybe some of you have. All right. We never knew it, or I didn't know it, but looting was reported during and after the fire. Remember, I was talking about how calm some of the guests went up. They were getting their valuables. Well, you only have so much time to get. Some of the valuables, they got the more expensive valuables, the less expensive valuables, we had looters coming in afterwards. People from the local area. Several were arrested. Several went to trial. And how did the people know that they went in and looted? They started bragging about, look at what I got. And they ended up getting arrested. All right. The value of the hotel loss was $750,000. Charles had $250,000 insurance, so he lost about $500,000. Recall that when he died in 1915, his estate was worth $4 million. He lost about 1/8 of his entire wealth. All right? I said it didn't bankrupt him. However, it did put a dent in his wallet. All right? His hotel ownership pride was the biggest loss. For the immediate Clayton and Thousand Islands area, this marked the close of the Gilded Age. The real estate market was already reflecting the downward trend. The coming of the age of the automobile and the airplane was on the horizons, and the wealthy were no longer coming here. Again, they could hop on planes. They could go to Europe easier. Thousand Islands was no longer the high spot for the real rich and famous. Also, around this time, the United States had implemented income tax. The rich never had to pay income tax until about 1910 era, and when they started paying income tax, they were more careful on how they spent their money. All right. The fire increased the awareness and need for fireboats. It was on an island. All right. The Clayton Fire Department today has 3 fireboats: the Last Chance, Slim Chance, and Snow Chance. And I go, Snow Chance. When I read that, I go, is that the same as No Chance? The Snow Chance is one that they use on the ice in the winter. All right. So I thought that there was a fireboat, the Calumet. But the fire department is called the Calumet, all right? And I have no doubt that that came from some of the fire equipment that Charles would have donated back in the day, and the Calumet name stuck with the fire department. All right, I'm going to finish up by saying what happened to the remains of the Frontenac Hotel. All right, and this is on page 179. Cleanup at the hotel site continued into 1912. Said when the steamer Phelps removed a barge load of iron scrap from the hotel ruins, and they sold it to Henry Capron, a well-known scrap dealer in Oswego. The laundry was purchased by Francis Kehoe of Clayton for the materials. The Benedict family purchased the golf club, and the George Calhoun bought the caretaker's house. Thieves in 1915 stole 600 pounds of copper wire from the fire site. This included the New York Telephone Company and the communication wires and power lines, which once fed the arc lights in the docks and the power lines. The annex, that still stood after the fire, was struck by lightning and burned in 1917. That was 6 years later. The ice houses burned in a fire in 1925. The docks washed away in successive winter storms. Emery's estate on 30 August 1940 auctioned off Round Island, Governor's Island, and 25 other islands, as well as properties on Grindstone and Wellesley Island. And E.G. Potter of Pennsylvania purchased 438 summer cottages on Round Island for $3,000. In October 1943, in the middle of World War II, the hotel made a contribution to the war effort. 100 tons of scrap metal was salvaged from the ruins. So the fire occurred in 1911. In 1943, they're still pulling out scrap, and a lot of it went to the war effort. So today we don't have much of the Frontenac Hotel. I guess you can go over there, and some of the sidewalks are still there. I have never been there. I need to get there. It's terrible that I haven't. And then after he passed away, we still had the Calumet Castle. That burned also in 1957. So the loss of the hotel, the loss of the castle, is a big loss to the Clayton community. Can we all imagine if that castle was still there, and the tourists? And I'd said to myself, well, if it was still there, give it to the T.I. Bridge Authority, let them manage it the same way as Bolt Castle. In my dreams. So
the rumor back then was it was a tax fire.
Yes, I have heard that it's a rumor. I don't know that it's documented, but again, the village leadership was putting a pretty heavy tax burden on the owners, as it has successive owners through the years, and they either didn't want to pay the taxes, or it was just too much. I mean, oops, it burned to the ground.
It was a bunch of local businessmen that bought it.
Right.
Harry Butcher and a whole bunch. Yeah. And they were going to do stuff with it.
Yeah. I wish it was still there. All right, I'm going to open it up to questions. I don't know if I can answer them, but I will definitely take them.
Did you know that Clayton Island provided the food for around the island for Frontenac?
Was it farms that were on there?
Farming.
Pig down, there was farms. I had heard a little bit.
Yeah, because there's a few beautiful apple trees left when my first husband worked there. They're russet apples.
Really? Yeah. Yeah, I have no doubt that different islands had different productions, and this hotel had the best of everything.
And they had a foundation of what they call greenhouse. Yeah, greenhouse.
Yeah, I'm sure they had flowers in the wintertime here as well. Yeah, thank you.
The other thing Tom that mentioned was was big to Clayton was Emery Field.
Emery
The other
Field.
side of the tracks from the Lions Field, where all
Yep.
the townhouses were, was a field that Emery owned, and Clayton used it for the ball field for a long, long time. Now, if you go further down that point, there's one spot on the shore that's all built out of granite blocks and beautiful, and it's where the other off-road granite, and Emery owned that land. Now, the most important thing about Calumet that is loved the most is it has no mosquitoes. The mosquitoes can't fly all the way out there. There's no place to breed on the island, no puddles or anything like that. There's other bugs, but no mosquitoes. That's very nice.
When President Grant came to visit, some of the writings of the day, he said, come on up to the Thousand Islands, where you can find many lovely non-mosquito spots. Yeah. So it's not just that one island, it's a lot of these islands.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, any other questions that I may or may not be able to help you with?
One more little bit of trivia. The house
Yeah.
that I lived in, back turn of the century after it was built, Harold Joels lived there, and he later was Clayton's oldest citizen, but when he was working, he was a caretaker at the Frontenac.
Okay, interesting. And we still have a caretaker today, right? Strauss that takes care of what remains.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I went over there a couple years ago. Yes.
They did not live here in the winter, so where did Emery live?
New York City. I couldn't tell you where in New York City, but that was, it definitely was a place in New York City.
Okay.
He may have even stayed at the Waldorf, quite a bit.
Another thing about the island is there was 2 islands,
Yes.
and they put in fill and changed it all around, and Calumet, quite a bit of it's filled in.
Okay, I didn't know, I did not know that. Interesting. All right. In the back, yes.
At the Calhoun Farm that was up in French Creek,
Okay.
it's pretty much gone now, but that used to be a vegetable farm that supplied vegetables to the islands,
Good.
hotels.
So you said Calhoun, could it be Joseph Calhoun's the individual that died?
Ancestors, yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering, yeah.
They had farms all over the area. Another one was at the lower bridge on Grindstone. They had a big steam pump that pumped out all the water out of that bay, and they grew vegetables up in there. And it was called the Diamond Farm. Yep, and now it's all flooded back in. You can see when you go up in there where they laid cedar logs to help it drain out and all like that. But yeah, a long time ago they drained that whole bay to grow lettuce. Lettuce and other bottom stuff.
Okay, so let's revert back to the 10 questions. What year was Charles Goodwin Emery born?
1836.
Bingo! What year did he die?
1999?
1915.
1915. How many times was he married? Twice. How did he make his millions?
Tobacco machines.
And what year did he buy the island?
97.
He came up to visit in 1878. He bought the island 4 years later. What year?
82.
Oh, 82.
1882. What was the name of the island when he bought it? Very good. Did he purchase or build the Frontenac Hotel? He purchased it. He had been there for 20 years. What year did the Frontenac Hotel burn?
1911.
Did anyone in the Frontenac Hotel fire die? One. What year did the Calumet Castle burn?
57.
You all got a perfect score. You can enjoy the rest of your day.